Hello, everybody, and welcome to Her Side of the Ruck. I'm Tash,
I'm Bernice.
and we're not pundits.
We're just two women who know what a ruck is.
Well, we all hope you had a very Merry Christmas. Me and Bernice are kitted out in our red and our green, very much Christmas colours if you celebrate that holiday. But we're looking forward to the new year and what 2026 has on offer for us. We're going to meet in Cape Town in early January. Super excited for that. But we're going to take a bit of time to reflect on some of our favourite moments from 2025. We have 5 moments each from the world of rugby that we've looked back on and thought, that was really quite incredible this year. So 10 altogether. We might have a little bit of English and South African bias in this one, but these are our personal favourites. So let's get into it. Bernice, let's start off with your number five. What is it?
Okay, so I think it was so difficult to only pick 5 moments, and I think what you said about the Springbok and the England bias, definitely. But I'm starting us off with a local club. Yeah. So I think my fifth favorite moment from this year was definitely watching the Sharks win away from home at Loftus. That was one of my highlights. So for anyone who lives in South Africa or just for anyone who knows Bulls fans, we've spoken about it a lot on the pod of how
Mm,
about how vocal they are and how outspoken they are. So traveling to Pretoria and playing at Loftus is not for the weak, and there's
no.
altitude and there's a lot of other factors and there's the outspoken fans. So playing in Pretoria is always difficult.
Mm,
And at that time, the Sharks were having a good season, but we could do with a win away from home. And it's always a good rivalry between the Sharks and the Bulls. And, it's always a big hyped up match. And in the
mm.
block where I was sitting, they were only, I think I was like one of the only Shark supporters in that block. There were quite a lot of Shark supporters in Pretoria, but on that day, I was all on my own. And if you know me, you know that I don't shy away from supporting my team, whether it be at Loftus, whether it be at Kings Park, I don't care. So yeah, and Loftus is a daunting place to do that because the Bull supporters are outspoken. So you might get thrown with a beer, you might, there's something along the way. But yeah, anyway, it's good vibes always. So yeah, I just remember it was quite soon after we joined the WLA, and I
Mm.
was thinking, I'm gonna take this content thing serious. So I was making a video, the Sharks were trailing at the time, and I was making a video of a trend at the time where it said, do you know you only have 30 minutes? And the Sharks are trailing, so I made a video saying like, okay, it's time, we need to, need to get it moving. And
Mm.
straight after that video, Lorenzo Julius ran along the sideline and they scored a beautiful try. And it was just from there onwards, it was just beautiful attacking play. And we ended up winning that match. But yeah, I think
Mm.
it's so nice to see your team play live, but it's even better when they win away from home. So that was definitely my fifth favorite moment of the year.
100%. Any sort of like local battles between
Yeah.
local clubs, like we've spoken about it on last week's episode about the local derbies, like the 1872 Cup. You've had Ulster Leinster isn't necessarily a traditional derby, but it's two Irish teams. So you've got those big clashes, and when you've got South African teams going up against each other, you see it in the stadium that more people go because there's almost like higher stakes with it and the bragging rights that come with it too. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a fantastic game. The Sharks recently beat the Bulls at Kings Park. So I think if you're a Sharks fan, you'll be very happy and not so great for the Bulls, is it? Never mind. Never mind. Maybe they will improve later on. Right. My fifth favourite moment. And I know this might sound a bit odd as me coming from a Leicester Tigers fan, but honestly, you've got to give credit where it's due to our local East Midlands rivals, Northampton Saints, in that semi final in the Investec Champions Cup against Leinster. I was rewatching the highlights today thinking, you can feel the emotion coming through the screen. You can hear it in the crowd. And I think where Leinster have come in the 25-26 season, they haven't been as impressive coming off the Lions tour. I mean, some of those guys are, you've got James Lowe, James Gibson Park, loads of other guys who play for Leinster week in, week out, and then go on the Lions tour. So you can kind of see where the fatigue has come in for the 25-26 season. However, Leinster were the team to beat in the 24-25 season. They basically didn't lose to anybody in the URC. They nilled people in round of 16, the quarterfinals leading up to this battle with Northampton Saints. And Saints beat them on home turf. And I was rewatching it thinking, those tries were brilliant. Like James Lowe scores a cracking try for Leinster when they're trying to bite back. They're down by 8-9 points or something. But the hat trick from Tommy Freeman was amazing. It was one of the standout performances from Henry Pollock, which I think contributed to his selection being on the Lions tour. Because obviously Andy Farrell would have been watching that match thinking, oh my goodness, half of my squad that I'm going to select for the Lions tour have just been beaten, and let a 19, 20-year-old just run through the line and score a worldie of a try. And the brand of rugby that Northampton Saints play is very exciting to watch. And it pains me so much to say that as a Leicester fan, but it is. And it was a moment where I was really proud of another English club for doing that and defeating a team in an amazing match. And okay, yeah, they didn't win against Bordeaux, but maybe that was their final. There's another one of my favourite moments where I picked another game, which is a semi-final. But I'm just like, semi-finals this year seem to be really quite fascinating because they were in the URC in the 24-25 season. But yeah, that's our fifth favourite moments. Let's move on to number four. Bernice, your fourth favourite moment from 2025.
There was just a lot of rugby happening this year, and I think one that is definitely worth a mention is the Women's World Cup.
Mm,
And I think the Women's World Cup and Rugby World Cup in general was great for women's rugby. And I mean, the Red Roses were amazing in the tournament. But I think for South African rugby as well, like we've
mm,
seen what the men's team did throughout the year, and they had a great season. But the SA women's rugby is not quite at that standard yet. So I think for them, this was a much needed tournament, and the results that they got from the tournament were great.
mm,
So I think one of the first matches that really stood out for me was in the warm-up match against the Black Ferns, where we won the Black Ferns. Yes, we know that the Black Ferns didn't necessarily put out their stronger side, but I think taking that confidence into the Rugby World Cup was something that really contributed to the success. And yes, we didn't get past the quarterfinals, but we have never made it past the pool stages
mm,
before this World Cup. And I'm really hoping to see that some of this also filters into the women's sevens rugby of South Africa, because they haven't been featuring as much as the women's 15. But I think the ladies can be very proud of themselves, even in the
mm,
quarterfinal against New Zealand, which was the first time that they made a quarterfinal. They didn't go down without a fight. It wasn't one of those matches where the Black Ferns completely dominated, even though they did in the last 20 minutes or so. But I think for South African rugby and for women's rugby in South Africa, and hopefully for little girls wanting to play rugby one day, was a really big, I think, confidence booster, but just in general good for women's rugby. And we know that the Bulls Daisies are one of the only clubs they play professionally, and they've been
mm.
contracted. So hopefully that's also something that more clubs will look into going into the future. But yeah, I think it was a great year for South African women's rugby.
I 100% agree with you. Sometimes you have to break it onto the world stage for people to really notice.
Mm,
And actually, it's your country's success that can convert it into what the infrastructure needs to change when you go back home, and how does that filter through? Because if you look at the Red Roses, they've got professional contracts, and the people who are in the PWR that play, most of them are semi-pro, and if their clubs help them out with extra work like coaching opportunities or other forms of
mm,
training or being a physio and stuff, I know I can speak for Trailfinders that they definitely do that. They get a lot of the women who aren't necessarily backed fully by the Red Roses. So, for example, someone like Meg Jones is a professional rugby player through and through. She's on a full-time contract, so she might not necessarily need to do other full part-time work to kind of make
Mm,
up the salary, as there are plenty of other women's rugby players in England that still have to do that. But clubs are being supportive in helping making sure people get enough cash that they need to live and survive. So, but I think having that infrastructure is necessary if we're going to create super competitive teams. I think South Africa did a
mm,
fantastic job when they don't necessarily have that in how they fronted up in the competition. And as you said, they didn't let the Black Ferns walk all over them. They scared them, if anything, in that first 40 minutes in that quarter final. And the Black Ferns, just the experience, they're World Cup winners, what, five, six times over? They
yeah.
have a lot of players who play on the sevens, who play 15s, who play for clubs back home, some that now play in the PWR in England. So these are very experienced players, and their attention to detail, you can really tell.
Mm,
Like I've seen it when I've spoken to players at Trail Finders, they've said, "Oh, the Black Ferns girls, their minutiae and their knowledge of the fine detail is incredible."
mm,
So you're going up an opponent who does have a significant advantage in that regard. So I think the South African women's team should be really proud of themselves, and I really hope that it invigorates a lot of women in your country to pick up a rugby ball and give it a go. My fourth favourite moment, English bias coming in. England winning their tour in Argentina over the summer. I know in the summer
oh,
we focused a lot on the Lions tour, and too right. I've got my Lions jersey on right now because the Lions tour is an iconic thing. It only comes every 4 years, but I think that the summer international tours didn't get as much,
mm,
I suppose, as big a spotlight as they normally do.
mm,
But for me, England to beat Argentina in a full tour in Argentina is very impressive. That first fixture that I watched, Ben Spencer at scrum half, George Ford at 10, you just think, my goodness, that this is a fantastic combo. And I think Fordy works well with a lot of the scrum halves in the
yeah.
England camp at the minute, whether it's Alex Mitchell. But I think Ben Spencer has been previously overlooked. But I think he plays a certain style of rugby that suits certain styles of game plans. And we've seen it through the Autumn Nations and the same with the Springboks. Razzie will pick a 10 based on how he wants the rest of his squad to play.
Mm,
It's exactly the same with England in terms of the scrum half. Steve Borthwick will pick a 9 and a 10 or a half-back pairing, so to speak, depending on how he wants his side to play. And then we'll pick wingers based on that. He'll either pick aerial wingers or power wingers. But the second game, England were losing, and it was only in the final few minutes that England clutched that win against Argentina. And a lot of the starting 15 that we'll see play in the Men's Six Nations in 2026, that we saw play in the Autumn Nations in 2025, they were on the Lions tour or they were rehabbing from injuries. So England went with a slightly depleted side and still convincingly won in Argentina. And okay, the world rankings say slightly differently that New Zealand are second in the world technically at the minute. But I don't know. I think it's our two countries who, based on recent
yeah.
performances, are South Africa by a mile are on top of the world right now. But I think England are coming in hot at second. Sorry if you're a Kiwi, feel free to disagree with me. And I know I'm being very biased with that comment, but I was really impressed by England, and for so long, it's been really quite depressing to be an England men's fan. The women, brilliant, like what
Yeah.
they've achieved is fantastic, but the losses, like 2024 was a tough year to be a fan of men's English rugby. But this year they've turned it around, and you know what? The Steve Borthwick plan is working.
I have to completely agree with you, and I'm so happy that you brought it up. I think England had a great year and a great season in terms of, most of the international games, and winning Argentina in Argentina is also not an easy
Mm.
ask. And I think to do that the way that they did was incredible. And I think what England is building at the moment is something really good and something really strong. And they are literally taking things from what Steve Borthwick is doing. He's taking things from, okay, he's seeing that, okay, he might need a stronger bench. So he's incorporating that into his play and it's working for him. And it actually, you can see the improvement that it's made in their games and in their season. So I think England had a great year. And I'm excited to see what's going to happen next year. And we'll be talking about it a bit later. But yeah, I think England is doing really well at the moment.
for us, we're both very happy with them because both of our countries are doing
Yeah.
very well, and it will be in 2026 that both of our sides will bash heads. Well, hopefully not bash heads on the pitch, but they'll come across each other in a great clash in the summer. Let's move on to number three. Bernice, what was your third favourite moment?
Third moment definitely has to be from the autumn internationals. Yeah, I think it's been a long time coming, but the France versus Springboks match was just, yeah, I think it was incredible. I think in the build up to the match, there were a lot of comments made. There were a lot of French players saying they wouldn't even have a beer with one of the South African players had it, been outside of the match. And so there were a lot of talk from since the 2023 World Cup to that game. There were a lot of talks around revenge, and there were a lot of emotion in that
Mm,
game and a lot of things said by Fabian Gaultier before the match. And I think for me, the standout from that performance from the Springboks was mainly due to the way that we beat France. It wasn't just a game with
mm,
1 point, or it wasn't a close or a tight match. It was a proper win.
yeah.
And I think since the Springboks lost to the All Blacks in the Rugby Championships, they've been a lot more consistent with their performances. Whereas prior to that, it was a little bit on and off, and a good game
Mm,
here, not so good performance here. Whereas when they lost to the All Blacks in the Rugby Championships, they were a lot more consistent, and you could see that in the autumn internationals.
mm.
Even though we did struggle a little bit against Italy in the first half. But yeah, I think it was very good to see the consistency of the performance against France, against Ireland. And yeah, I think that kind of just silenced all of the critics. There were no talks anymore after that game. And that's exactly the way that you beat a team. They have all of those comments and, all of the plans around revenge games and everything. So yeah, I think that was beautiful performance from Springboks.
It was so clinical that there was intent behind everything. And if you think about how the game opened, you would have thought, oh, it'll be a bit tit for
Mhm.
tat, but I think, oh, the French could be on here for a win at
Mhm.
home. But nah, the Springboks were just like even with penalties and losing players to off the field, you just think like to do that, it is a huge statement. It's a big statement win. And I think as well, when you look at where the Investec Champions Cup is right now this season and where some of the
Mhm.
French teams are in comparison to the South African teams, English and Scottish teams, as of right now, actually, is French rugby on a mini decline? That's an ominous question, a very much an open question. I
Mhm.
feel like the men's Six Nations will prove a lot. If France beat
Yeah.
Ireland, England, and Scotland, then we can push those rumours to the side. But if Ireland beat or draw France and England beat France in France, I think what we said about Springboks way ahead being world number ones and England coming in a close second. I feel like the men's Six Nations will affirm that opinion, even if the world rankings do say that the All Blacks are currently second in the world. But as I say, that's just my opinion. But that was an incredible match. I remember just like watching it, thinking like, my goodness, how amazing! And there are so many weapons in the Springbok side now, which it's like that makes it really difficult for their opposition because you think, what are they going to do now? If they're in a bit of trouble, it doesn't
Mhm.
matter. It doesn't matter if they've lost a player to the field. It doesn't matter if they've lost loads of props. It doesn't matter if they've got injuries because they'll use their back line or they'll change their fly half or their scrum half or they'll change the engine room or they'll bring on the bomb squad. They'll do something. Razzie will do something with his squad. And that depth, you can tell, like, this is building to 2027. So it's very exciting. And yeah, that was a great match. I love when teams beat the French, especially England when
Yeah.
England beat the French. So, and South Africa can be my second favorite when they beat the French. So, hats off to you, 100%. My third favorite one was actually a game that I was at and kind of coming to club level. I'm a Leicester fan, and Leicester have gone through. They've ridden the wave quite a lot in the past 5 years with lots of different changes of coaches, and they've won one final, made another final, and it's but didn't lose that one, but didn't win that one, lost to Bath. But Bath were head over heels for the entire year. But look, that final, that's not my favourite moment. It's the semi final before that. But the final, I was at both games, and Leicester only lost by 2 points. And I think that they should be really proud from the 24-25 performance. But it also goes to show how great a coach Michael Checker is. And I'm disappointed that we couldn't keep him for longer, even though Jeff Parling has been fantastic at Leicester. But yeah, my third favourite moment is Leicester Tigers v Sale Sharks in the 24-25 Gallagher Premiership. The thing that stands out for me is that kick from Pollard. He kind of skews it. I feel like I talk about this all the time, but I was there. I saw it. I was live. I felt the emotion from Mattioli was Welford Road. And the crowd literally went mental when he scored that try. And Radders has scored some insane tries since he's joined us. And unfortunately, he wasn't best utilised at Newcastle, but Newcastle have had a lot of financial issues. The Red Bull have come in, but we took him on mid between the 24-25 season. And I'm so glad we did because he has massively improved. And just being there at the game and being like, we're in a final. After everything that's happened, the grit and the talent and the skill and the unity of Leicester pulled us through to the final. And I was so proud as a fan, so proud.
And that's so amazing. And I think I spoke about it in my fifth favorite moment, the Sharks, like seeing your team win. That's like nothing beats it. So we're both very crazy and about our live matches. And
Yes.
that makes me so excited for your trip to Cape Town, watching Leicester versus the Stormers, because we're both
Mm.
super passionate about our teams. And even though the Stormers are not my first official team, that is going to be like England v South Africa.
Yeah,
So
sure.
that just makes me so much more excited for your trip to Cape Town.
And look, if you're watching this and you didn't think that women can get really shouty and really passionate about rugby, men's rugby, women's rugby, well, we are evidence that it's normal. Get out there, go to a game, pick a team, enjoy it, and shout your vocal cords off, but don't damage them. Okay, okay. I think one final thing on the club stuff, because my final two aren't club, they're more about international. But club rugby has such a special place in my heart. And I feel like you'll probably share the same sentiment, Bernice, on that one. I'm very proud of when my country represents, and especially when they win, or even if they don't win, if they put out a very good performance and were just beaten by the better team on the day. Doesn't matter, you're still proud of them. But there's something about being a club supporter and being an avid fan and going to the games where you just feel a slightly closer to the team. And sometimes I've said to this is not for me to sound unpatriotic at all, because I am hugely patriotic to England. But sometimes I care a bit more about how my club does than my country. I know that might sound odd to some people, but when Leicester or Glasgow really perform, it makes me like, I don't know, I get this buzz. And I don't know if anyone else shares that feeling. If you do, please let me know in the comments below. But I think it's also came from when England weren't performing very well and Leicester won games or Glasgow won games. I was kind of like, I can look past when you're not performing very well at country because my clubs are doing well. But when club and country isn't doing well, that's frustrating.
I definitely think that I share that sentiment, especially coming from a place looking at like where the Sharks are currently. So obviously the Sharks haven't been performing well. The head coach resigned, and there's a lot of things happening at the club at the moment. But, looking at the results week after week and seeing, 44-17, 59-17, 59-19, whatever the score is, it's very disappointing. And I think we had, I don't even know how many consecutive losses. So it was disappointing. Now
Mm,
seeing the Sharks performing a little bit better, yes, they're not nearly where they should be, in terms of the actual performance and the performance that they put out on the field. But them being back to their winning ways also makes me feel proud to even, walk around in the streets and chat to people about rugby, because, you can also
yeah.
brag about your team again and be the proud supporter that you've always been. Not to say that, if they're losing, that you're not proud of them. But yeah, I think especially now I can definitely relate to that. And, it's watching the win, watching the Sharks' last win. I think that was just an incredible thing to see, seeing how proud they were of one another and yeah, just kind of seeing the team come together again because consecutive losses like that also really hurts the team and the team
Yeah,
morale
it
and the
does.
culture. So
Hmm.
it's not nice seeing that. So definitely have to say that I share that sentiment.
We love our clubs, and you can't change that at all. That will never change. I think once you become a fan, you are fully committed, regardless of what happens. So, and people, I remember when I was at university, someone said, "Oh, you're a fake fan because you've only started watching it when you were," I was like 16, and I was like, no, this was when Leicester were really quite poor. I started to become a fan when they were probably at
Oh.
their worst. I think it's because people said in the 2000s they won everything, which was true. Anyway, but it's my local team. So look, I love our clubs, but my second favourite moment from this year was from what an amazing Lions tour we had in Australia. And we talked about it a lot on the pod, and a lot of you really got involved with having conversations with us about this. But my second favourite moment was the Lions winning at the MCG in the second test. What a belter of a match! That was amazing.
I think this Lions tour had a little bit of everything that you really
Yeah.
want from a Lions tour. If I look back at it, I remember there were a lot of controversy around what happened in the second match, and they were cards and foul play and drama, and it just had everything. And I think what made it so special was, or not special, but I think what made it so significant was kind of the back and forth. Is Australia really good? Is the Lions really going to be that good?
Yeah.
There were also a lot of questions around selections and Andy Farrell, the choices that he made. And I think for Andy Farrell, that was also a big win, like just the series
Huge.
win in general. But the Lions tour was very entertaining and yeah, nothing short from what we want to see in a Lions tour, the drama, the niggles, it had everything. So even as a neutral, I really enjoyed watching that. And yeah, I think a lot of the teams in the Northern Hemisphere took a lot of confidence from that. And we
Yeah,
also even saw the confidence that Australia had going into the Rugby Championships in their first few matches,
for
winning
sure.
South Africa in or at Ellis Park. So that was quite significant. They got their win over Argentina. So I think for both teams, it was a very good tour. And yeah, obviously we spoke about it, but for England as well, I just think England just gone up from that Lions tour.
Definitely gave the English players a lot of confidence. I think it's
Mm,
had a slightly different effect with the Irish players. I think it's only
yeah,
contributed to fatigue because Farrell has played them a lot and he's played them consistently in
yeah.
2024. They've played so much club rugby, primarily with Leinster, although you've got the amazing player of Ty Byrne, who is a Munster man and one of my favourite rugby players in the world, actually. Just so consistent. He grafts so hard and is good at
Mm,
everything that he needs to be. His try was amazing. I thought Hugh Jones's try was great because normally when you see him score for Scotland or Glasgow Warriors, it's usually off. He's found a clean break. But that try
mm,
against the Wallabies, he really had to muscle his way to the try line. Dan Sheehan kind of leaping over. I think there's no hooker like Dan Sheehan, and I hate when he plays against England, but I love watching him play generally. I think he is very mobile and he kind of brings this hybrid athleticism that we're seeing a lot more in the front row generally. To come back and Keenan just to finish that try off, well, that man's name is written in British and Irish Lions history. I think this tour was really special because after the tour, when it was kind of still COVID and stuff, where there were no crowds and things, yeah,
mm,
we had social media, but it wasn't the same. That doesn't take away from the tour in South Africa at all and the quality of the rugby. It's just we were living in a different
yeah.
time. And I think it feels very weird for anyone to think back to those years. And
Yeah.
I want to wipe that
Oh,
from my memory. I don't want to think about
yeah.
those years. That was a weird time to be alive. But
Yeah.
the social media team and the team that went on tour with the Lions and all the broadcasters that were involved are
Yeah.
making it so special. They're part of me that felt I missed out. I wasn't there. I wasn't in Australia. I know people who were there, and it's a story that they will tell their grandkids if they have kids and grandkids or whoever, or they'll tell people, their friends, stories that they'll always tell. And that's what rugby also is for me. And I feel like that's partly what this episode is. We're telling stories about our favourite moments and how it made us feel and how we saw it made other people feel. And I think sometimes people negate that's also such a big impact of sport, specifically rugby. So that when I watched the highlights back this morning, I was like, you can feel the energy coming through the
Mm.
screen, and it sent me shivers down my spine and my arms, and I was like, to come back as well. And I think Australia did a great job in that first half, but it was just like the cat had ran away, then the mouse went, no, I'm going to hide in a hole, and then I'm going to sneak out when you're least expecting it. And that's how it felt. But this Lions tour was really, really special. And I mean, I might have to start saving some money so I can go down to New Zealand for the 2029 tour because it looked absolutely amazing. Bernice, your second favourite moment from 2025?
I think it might be expected or not, but my second favorite moment is definitely the Springboks win over Ireland. So this is also win from the autumn internationals, but I think the Springboks playing against France and the Springboks playing against Ireland are two new rivalries that formed over the last few years.
Mm,
And so every time that we play those two teams, it's, exciting. There's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of passion to the test as well. So I think what made this one so special is before we played Ireland in the autumn internationals, the last match against Ireland was last year in Durban, which the Springboks lost. And we didn't only lose that match, but we were a little bit bullied by Ireland. So I think it was a very hard pill to swallow for the Springboks. And, it's not necessarily the way that we like to play. And Franco Mostert broke his leg, and even Etzebeth were bleeding like crazy. So I think there were a lot of emotions that we took from that test and brought it into the autumn international test. And yeah, I think that win over Ireland in the autumn internationals was very special. And it also wasn't easy. Ireland did not make
mm,
it easy for us. But yeah, I think it was just again a very special win, just kind of seeing how we lost the previous match against Ireland. That was also something that we really needed. And because of the nature of the test that we played, so we played Ireland, we played Japan, France, Wales. We needed to win France and Ireland for it to kind of be a successful tour. So that was my fourth favorite moment.
again, another statement win in the autumn internationals. Razi's plan. His plan was to send a message to Ireland, I think, in that one, because the scoreline could have been so much bigger, but that wasn't what the plan was. It was clear that he wanted to show how good his forwards were, and his forwards could just decimate the front row. I think Andrew Porter struggled in the scrum. He's a decent prop, but I just don't think he was good enough on that day. And there's been other people who have said it might be time to rotate him out of the squad. I mean, that's other people's opinions, not necessarily mine. But Ireland did a good job of staying in the fight and what going down to 12 men at one point. That was incredible. But this was a statement win in a way that rugby coaches don't usually make this type of statement. Normally, you go scoreline. We're going to make the statement with the scoreline. Like I think about in the men's Six Nations when England beat Wales in Cardiff by such a big
Mhm.
scoreline with what might have not been their full strength team, but and then players like I think I'm again another player I mention every single week, Henry Pollock. That was his moment where he really just went bam. I'm here. Hello, everybody. And I think the Springboks, the individual players in the Springboks had done that throughout the Autumn Nations series. Sasha Feinberg Zulu being the standout name in my mind, who's performed so well at club level since going back to the Stormers. But this was a whole team. Bam, watch out. You don't mess with us, and we're going to win, and we're going to win by any means possible. And I watched that thinking, this is very impressive. and Ireland have to go back to the drawing board. And I personally think they need some fresh blood in as a
Yeah.
squad because the players that they have, I still think players like James Givison Park, because I've watched him recently and he is
Mm,
being so consistent. When he was playing at Leicester, his distribution was great and he's still quick. But although James Lowe has scored some fantastic tries in the lines, he scored some amazing tries for Leinster. I just think give someone else a turn and
mm,
bring in that new blood because it will get to a point where, like what happened to Wales a few years ago, you lose all of your senior players all at
mm.
once. You need
Yeah.
to start slowly feeding in young blood and give them the experience alongside talented players and experienced players like James Lowe, Caelan Doris, Ty Byrne. Give them the experience with those players. When they all get to a point where they're either long-term injured, they decide that to hang their boots up at whatever age for whatever reason. When you lose that, you've then got a massive gap. And I just think they need to start funneling more players in. And they've got the academy systems to do it. They've got the talent in the provinces. You look at how good some players are playing at Ulster and Munster and in Leinster's younger or B, C teams, if you want to call them that. The talent is there. Use it. So I'd be interested to see in 2026 what Ireland can do because we clearly saw what the Springboks could do.
Yeah, and I also think in order to be competitive in the next Rugby World Cup, which is also right around the corner, you only have
Mm,
a few tastes leading up to the World Cup. And uh, I think if you want to be competitive, you need new blood in your squad. And that's what
100%.
England are doing. That's what the Springboks are doing. And you just look at the effect, but they have been building for the last year, for the last 2 years towards the World Cup. So you can't just now want to bring in new players, also not all at once. So it's going to be interesting to see how Ireland approach their next year and their next season, both in the Six Nations and the Autumn Internationals. All of their tests going to be interesting.
100%. Again, Men's Six Nations, I think, will be a proving ground for all six countries. And can they put out statement performances? And who will win? I'll obviously be backing the men in white, the rose on the chest, but we'll see
Yeah.
what happens. I hope this is the year. I'm crossing both fingers and crossing everything on my body. Ah, talking of England, my favourite moment of 2025, it has to be the Red Roses winning the World Cup. It was on home soil. I think this Women's Rugby World Cup was astounding. There's no other word for it because the hype around it, the social media engagement, the stories we saw on and off the field, and the quality of rugby was amazing. But for England to have built towards this, I think it would have been disappointing if they didn't win, especially with the
Mm,
infrastructure behind them. I will say that as a no. And in terms of the level of professionalism and how the RFU has supported women's rugby in England, it's been very positive. And if Canada had won in the final, or Canada hadn't beaten the Black Ferns and it was another Black Ferns England final, I know people may say this that, oh, England didn't play the Black Ferns. I'm like, I know, and I know that the Black Ferns are the Red Roses' kryptonite at times. However, it played out in England's favour, and regardless of the opposition, they were consistent. And the final maybe wasn't as exciting as the two semi-finals. And we're kind of seeing this trend, aren't we? Where the semi-finals are so
mm,
gripping and so exciting. And
yeah,
then the finals, either one team really dominates or there's loads of mistakes. I feel like all the finals I've watched in either the 24-25 season or the start of this, or
yeah,
just like in the past 12 months, you see this kind of tit for tat. And the semi-finals are so much more dramatic. And the finals are like, oh, right, cool. But anyway, I still think the win, the hype was amazing. And I'm very privileged that I get to work with some of these players and work with players from Canada and from New Zealand and from England in my job at Trailfinders. So I've got to see the quality of these players on the field and off the field. They are great people, but also the conversion of the fans into the PWR. After the first, I think, 6 rounds of the PWR, attendance is up by 70%. That is huge. And that is all because of the Women's Rugby World Cup and how good it was. But the World Cup is a huge highlight for me for 2025. But the Red Roses winning it. That is my favourite moment, and that will go down in rugby history.
I almost feel like we needed a drum roll before you mentioned your favorite moment. But no, I definitely have to agree with you. I think just on how they performed, what they've put into the women's rugby team, it almost was expected even before you saw
Mm,
their performance in the Rugby World Cup that the Red Roses will take it. But I think what's more special is the Red Roses actually living up to that expectation and being like, yeah, we are going to win this. And I just think they were the most consistent team throughout the whole World Cup, and they were very well deserved winners. So I don't think anyone can argue. And just the Rugby World Cup in general was amazing. And I think there's going to be such a shift for women's rugby after that World
mm,
Cup.
mhm.
And I hope that all teams can really build from that.
100%. I think women's sports and women in sport is growing exponentially. And I mean, we're a very, very tiny, teeny tiny part of the wider puzzle. But even though neither of us play rugby, it factors into our lives very significantly,
Mm.
both on a personal and professional level. So the Rugby World Cup summed that up. And it also gave the opportunity for people who wouldn't normally go to rugby in parts of England. Like one of the games was played up in the northeast. There's not much rugby in the northeast. It's all about football or soccer. If you're an American watching this, up in that part of England. So the fact that there was rugby there in the Stadium of Light, which is a huge stadium, to get so many fans there to watch women play this amazing sport is phenomenal. And I feel very proud to be English. I know a lot of people in England don't really like us saying that, but I am very proud to be English. And I'm really proud that England won and, as you said, lived up to that pressure and didn't let it phase them because they did talk about it. They talked about how to deal with it. There's a lot of media pressure on them, but they handled it and they handled it so well, but it made the sport more accessible. It put rugby on more screens. It got rugby out to audiences that hadn't necessarily experienced it before. And just generally, it was a very, very special feeling. And it feels like so much has happened since then, but that was a big highlight for me in 2025. Bernice, your favorite moment from 2025?
Oh, I had such a big like thinking around this one because I think the Springboks have had an amazing year. They've built depth in the squad. There was such a flood of young players coming into the team, like Ethan Hooker,
Mm.
Sasha Feinberg, and we won back-to-back championships. And the autumn internationals were amazing for Springbok rugby. But I think one match that really stood out for me, and that was when you mentioned how incredible semifinals were this time around, was the Sharks versus Munster. And I think for so many reasons, and we did a whole episode on it, so I'm not going to go into depth, but I think just the penalty shootout, the intensity,
Mm.
the drama with Jaden Hendricks and Jack Crawley, like everything contributed to an insane quarterfinal. And so the week after that, so that put the Sharks in the semi-final against the Vodacom Bulls, and that wasn't nearly as exciting as the quarterfinal. Just going to show that the point that you made earlier on. And I think that was just an incredible match of rugby. And those are
Mm.
the rare moments that you barely see, like the penalty shootouts and young players like Bradley David stepping up. And, no one really knew who he was beforehand. Now he's a superstar and everyone will
Mm.
remember him for that moment. And I just think that is where you really see the caliber of players or the skill that players have if they can step up in those moments. And nothing's taken away from Jaden or Jordan, and even Jack Crawley for that matter. But I just think that was an incredible match and something that you will be talking about long after that match. And yeah, I
Mm.
think I don't think that's a new rivalry that developed necessarily, but I do think there will always be that thing between Jaden Hendricks and Jack Crawley, and yeah,
Mm.
so I thoroughly enjoyed that quarterfinal.
That quarterfinal made URC and rugby history. There aren't many events in the world of rugby where you think it goes that far, and it was neck for neck. Literally, if you want an example of a tit for tat rugby match, that is it. That is the quarterfinal. I can only think of everyone who worked at the URC being like, no, guys, socials, right? We need to sort this out. We need to get this out now. This has never happened before. We need to tell everybody that this is happening. And the broadcasters were probably thinking, right, guys, we're going to be another 20 minutes. Got to delay the adverts. Like we're still carrying on. I just think like that is the amazing thing about live sport. You just don't know what can happen. And that is another thing about knockout rugby. That same intensity, the having to stay composed and calm, but so competitive to stay in that match for so long. Like the mental energy that went into that by both teams was incredible. That these athletes do a lot of physical training. We know how strong and fast they are, but we don't always talk about the mental resilience that they have to go through. And that match is an example of how they truly matched up to each other. And I remember watching it being like, like I couldn't gasp quick enough because it was just drama after drama after
Amazing.
drama, and one of those very memorable matches in the URC. Right, well, 2025 is going to be behind us. What an incredible year it's been. We launched her side of the Ruck. We did the URC's Women's Leadership Academy. We've watched so much rugby and talked a lot about rugby. And guess what? You guys have been along the journey with us. So thank you so much to every one of you who has watched our videos, liked our videos, commented, subscribed. And if you are new to the channel, hit the red button because we love having you with us and hearing your views. 2026 is an exciting one with a lot in store. Bernice, what are you most excited for in terms of rugby next year?
As you've mentioned, we launched her side of the rack in 2025, and that ultimately means everything is UK versus SA. So I think I'm definitely most excited about the Nations Cup. So that means
Mm,
that England will be playing South Africa at Ellis Park. And at first I was like, oh, why not at Loftus? But I think that is such a good venue pick for that match. And yeah, I'm so excited. I think I'm excited for the Nations Cup as a whole. Scotland will also be playing South Africa
mm,
here, but I think the match that I'm looking most forward to is England versus South Africa. Just also in terms of where both teams are at the moment, as you've
mhm.
mentioned, they are your number two currently ranked, and 100% like I definitely understand why. So I think a lot of people actually missed that game in the autumn internationals, and that's the one match that a lot of people wanted to see was England
Yeah,
versus the Springboks. So
100%.
I'm very excited to see where both those teams will be
Hmm.
um, around the Nations Cup. So that's definitely one of the things that I'm most excited about. And hopefully the Sharks will get back to their winning ways. They are at two consecutive wins. Let's hope we make top eight.
Yeah, well, you never know with the Sharks because they have performed really well in recent years or clutch it in the final few rounds. I think with the URC, it is a very long competition. What there are 18 rounds altogether. So teams can do it in the final few weeks, but you do just got to think like I hope we're in the top eight and I hope we're not traveling really far away if we are in the bottom four out of that top eight. But I'm looking forward to see where Glasgow can go in the URC this year. They're kind of straggling between first and sixth, they're kind of depending on who wins
Mm,
each week. So they're kind of moving up and down.
yeah.
I'm excited to see what they can do for the rest of the season. I am excited to see how Leicester will perform in the Gallagher Prem. I am not so sure that the Investec Champions Cup is our year this year. I think focusing on the bread and butter of our domestic league is probably on the cards for Tigers, even though I think it's going to be such a great contest into that top four because there isn't a quarter final in the English league. You just have a straight semi final and final at Allianz Twickenham. I'm excited to see how the PWR unfolds, as that's something that I'm involved in personally and professionally. And yeah, that match in the Nations Cup will be huge. And then the Six Nations, both the men's and the women's, will be covering all of that on her side of the Ruck. Wow. 2026 is going to be a big year, even better than, well, even better. Can it be even better than 2025? Because this has been a phenomenal year. Thank you so much to everybody for being with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. We really appreciate it. But that's all we've got time for now on Her Side of the Ruck. From myself and Bernice, have a very good new year. We hope that it goes off to a great start. If you have any New Year's resolutions, let us know down below. We'd love to hear them. Do you have one, Bernice? I haven't actually thought about it yet.
No, I think this year I'm just going free flow. I'm not having any New Year's resolutions. Yeah, I don't want to think about it. I just want to enjoy the trip to Cape Town with you. And that's the only New Year's resolution I have, is to enjoy the trip to Cape Town.
100%. And also for me to jet set off to the beautiful sunny summery southern hemisphere. That was a lot of S's in a very short space of time. It's just something I'm really looking forward to, and 2026 will get off to a great start. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us on Her Side of the Ruck. Signing off is me, Tash.
Signing off is me, Bernice.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.